For CBSI Talking Business. We're in Verona, New York today at the Independent Bankers Association annual conference. Have a chance to talk to one of the speakers. Kicked off today's session, Mike Jamesson of Jamesson Associates gave a economic forecast. And Mike, I think the point that stood out most from your talk today was that you don't see a recession coming up in the near future.
Yeah, I think that's right, Ken. I think that the reason for that, I think, is that the economy seems to have kind of gone through some rough patches and survived them at this point. Very resilient. I think the American consumer, now that they have jobs and they've had increased wages, continue to spend money. It's clear that prices are higher, but folks keep spending, and I think that that's the real key to staying out of a recession, is that the labor market continues to be as robust as it has been.
Very good. And you talked about the Federal Reserve, the impact of rising interest rates over the last months, the impact that has on banks and managing their businesses. Why is the interest rate hikes by the Fed impact the banking industry?
Well, the banks take money in from depositors and they make loans on the other side. And what has happened is that the Federal Reserve has raised short-term interest rates very dramatically, and intermediate-term interest rates have not risen by as much. So consequently, they're paying more for their money because they tend to borrow short, and they're not getting quite as much on their lending on the other side because those rates have not increased as much. And the other factor here is that the Federal Reserve is shrinking its balance sheet, and that has the impact of shrinking the overall deposits in the banking system. So banks are challenged both because there are fewer deposits in the system and because those deposits cost more. And that's one of the key reasons that they're running into some real headwinds at the current time.
Hey, talk about the end of a 35-year era of stable inflation and bond yields that have been pretty stable. What's the cause of the change in this 35-year era of stability?
Well, I think that the main reason is that inflation, which had been coming down and it was quite benign for a long period of time, has no longer is quite as quiescent as it had been. And I think there's a number of reasons. I think the key reason, however, is that we've gone from an environment where businesses held the upper hand versus labor, and that the supply of labor was far greater than the demand. That's been flipped. Since the end of the pandemic, what we found is that the demand for labor, open positions, et cetera, have indeed increased to the point where it exceeds the available labor supply. And that's resulted in increased wages, increased costs, and those aren't going away because the baby boomers are retiring. And that is holding down the overall growth of the labor force, and consequently, when supply increases and when demand increases in excess of supply, the price goes up, wages go up, and that's an underpinning of the overall inflation picture.
Mike, tell us a little bit about your career and your practice at Jamesson Associates.
Well, I've been doing this for a long, long time. I started in banking in 1975, worked for a series of banks that actually the bank that I worked for kept getting purchased. Ultimately, it was Fleet. I left the bank in the early 1990s, started my consulting firm that does asset liability management, and been working with community banks ever since then. My focus is obviously on balance sheet management, risk management, interest rates, the economy, financial markets, et cetera.
Mike, final thought for us today on being here with the community bankers of New York State.
No, I mean, it's a great group. It's a group that supports local communities and consequently is one of the real pillars of the American financial system, because if you look at the numbers, it's community banks that make those loans to small businesses and really get things started versus what the big banks are doing out there.
Mike Jamesson, Jamesson Associates at the New York State Independent Bankers Association Conference here in Verona. Great to chat with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this is Ken Kreitzer for CBSI Talking Business.